I had a conversation the other day with a really good friend, and he's not overly fond of very wealthy people. He sees them in generally a not great light. But thankfully, he says to me, "You're different." And so I appreciate that. But he inspired this video. And this is a little bit of an odd video. And the video is around this concept of buying a second home if you're an entrepreneur. I'm recording this video for a couple reasons. One, this would be a behind the scenes conversation that people that have the money to do such things might have. The bigger idea here is there an alternative way to accumulate assets without buying those assets? And this will make sense as you listen to the video. And the reason I'm making this video is I'd like to give you a different way to think. This is how I have long thought. It's also the kind of conversation I might have when I'm sitting in a room with a bunch of people that are worth 9 figures and above, meaning the majority of the room is worth $100 million or more. This is the type of conversation you'd hear. And my friend inspired this video for that reason. So, as you watch this, don't so much get caught up in the idea of the video is about buying a second house, because you might not care. More, listen to the logic that goes into why you should or shouldn't buy a second house, and if you were to, what's the alternative way to do it? That's really the point of this video. I hope it gives you something to think about. If you're an entrepreneur, I think it's very difficult to justify buying a second house. I think you're better off renting than buying. Let me explain why. But I'll also say there are a couple exceptions. If you feel you are so unbelievably wealthy, what I'm about to say doesn't matter, then, well, it doesn't matter. Or the one exception I've noticed is lake homes. I know a number of people that own lake homes, and they legitimately, when their kids are young, use them all the time. As long as their kids don't play too many sports. As soon as the kids play sports, whole thing goes out the window, and then they don't get used very often. My belief, as I've thought about the data, is second homes don't get used very often, and therefore you're better off renting. So let me kind of talk you through this analogy. And what matters is why you should buy a second business instead of buying a home. So Tiffany, my wife, and I, we always wanted to live in Colorado part of the year. Telluride, Vail, Crested Butte, but really Telluride kind of by far is our place. We've spent a lot of time in Telluride. The problem was we could never do it because our boys were in school, they were in sports, they were busy. We would not have spent much time there. It never made sense. All my businesses are here. It wasn't so common to do remote work back then. I know people did it, but we weren't, our company wasn't wired that way. Now both of our boys are out of school, and we found it still doesn't make sense for us. And it doesn't make sense for a whole ton of reasons. And I'm going to walk you through those and then give you a different way to think about this. The reason why it doesn't still make sense for us, and our situation is different than yours most likely, we've concluded that we still want to be predominantly where our boys are at. So if our boys are in Dallas, then we want to be in Dallas. We don't want to be in Colorado 6 months of the year and they're here and then we don't get to see them all the time. We like variety. We spend what has been for years now, many months of the year outside of the country. We're concerned that if we were to buy a place, we'd feel like we need to use the place all the time. And as a result, we wouldn't do all the other cool stuff that we've done for a long time. And frankly, that we've done for more than a decade now. We just like the variety. We like seeing different things and different kinds of people and different cultures and different food and different all the different stuff. We love international travel. If you just do a few international travel trips a year, that really cuts into your use of a second place. And then the biggest one for me, more is just more. I like more, and I hire out everything in my life. We have somebody that probably does almost everything for us. That way I can predominantly just focus on work now that I'm back to work and, fun stuff and trips, but I don't want to do all the little things. So if I have a second place, I need a person that can travel there and deal with all that stuff for me because I'm not going to deal with it. Otherwise, what's the point? But even with all of that, even the fact that we have somebody that does everything for us Stuff still makes it to my to-do list. Problems still make it to my to-do list. It's still on my brain. It's still a thing. It still consumes energy. It drains my energy. And that energy pulls from building things, which is what I'm most passionate about, or being completely disconnected, or as best I can possibly be disconnected. So I want only the most important things in my life. And so that's why I say more is more. It's like, it's one more thing that's going to drain at my subconscious in some small way, even if I outsource most of the care of that property. So that's good, but let's just talk pure numbers. Most of these properties, they don't get used. From the data I've seen, most of them get used about a month a year. My business partner for years has owned a home in Telluride, and he probably uses it 2 to 4 weeks a year, and he doesn't run it out. And I just look at that and I think, and he's aware of this too, it's like, wow. But fortunately, Telluride has been one of the greatest markets to own a place in. I think it's pretty much doubled in value in the last 4 years. So phenomenal investment. But you can't help but look at that and say, wow, that place is sitting empty 50 weeks of the year. There's carrying costs on this thing. Is this really the best use of our money? In that case, if you were in Telluride, Aspen, a few other markets over the last many years, yeah, that's pretty much one of the best places you could park your money. But are you in one of those markets? And if you are in one of those markets, do you really think that's about to happen again in the next 4 years? I do not. I'll give you one more example. I hope he's okay with me saying this. At the height of COVID, when travel was a bit of a challenge, he had to fly private to deal with something at his property. He flew there and he flew back. They didn't even stay there. And in fact, I was in Telluride the day before we got on an airplane and left Telluride as they closed everything down for COVID. And so Telluride kind of went in this lockdown mode, and there's just a whole bunch of stuff going on with travel at the height of COVID. He had to go deal with something. I don't know what he spent, but I know that it's around, for flying a pretty good plane, it's around $12.5 an hour, air hour. And so coming out of Dallas, he probably spent $25 there and back, so $50,000. That's a pretty unusual scenario, but there are unusual scenarios over a long period of time when you own something. The costs add up, and then you hardly use it. And so that's one of the examples of why I don't think it makes a ton of sense to buy. I just think the math is bad. Unless you're buying, and again, I'm a mountain person, so forgive the mountain examples. I know from doing events, most people are actually beach people, because whenever we'd say, hey, where do you guys want to go when we're throwing events? Everybody wants to go to the beach. They want to go to Mexico. They want to go to the beach. They don't usually vote to go to the mountains. But my wife and I are 100% mountain people. We are not beach people. It's fine, but we're not beach people. So sorry for the examples, but a couple of the single best markets in the United States are actually Aspen and Telluride, which are mountain places. And so I'll use those examples. Outside of those two examples, appreciation might be strong, but those are like exceptionally strong appreciation markets. But are you really going to spend the kind of money that it takes to get into one of those markets? And if you're not, if you're just buying in, well, I won't name a bunch of places because everybody lives in different areas and it may be meaningless to you, but if you live in a different area, if you buy in an appreciating area, but not a massively appreciating area, then the math isn't that great. You really have to buy in just a couple places in the United States to get the crazy appreciation. And I believe that a lot of that appreciation has now been missed. So I'm going to use an example, and it's kind of a big example. Just divide the numbers I give you. So my belief is to get into the Telluride market, I can't find anything I'd be happy with for less than $6 million. And I know that might sound terrible or crazy, but that's my reality. That market is very expensive, and really most of the great stuff is around 10 or above. So let's just go with 6. And you're like, well, that's stupid. I would never buy a $6 million place. Okay, divide it by 6. Divide it by whatever your number is. So let me just give you some math. If you were to buy a $6 million property in Telluride and you put down 20%, if you're not paying cash for it, so you put down $1.2 million on $6 million, your payment is probably, I don't know what it would be exactly, but I'm guessing it's $30,000+, maybe $35,000 a year right now with interest rates. Oh, I'm sorry, not a year, 35,000 a month. Then you have all your carrying costs. You have taxes, you have maintenance, you have, depending on where you buy an HOA, you have all these other costs. And so, like, the bare minimum is at $35,000 a month. Plus, you're losing the opportunity cost on the $1.2 million you've already taken out of your investments and put into this asset that's just sitting there. Well, I know from experience, I can rent a property, for example, maybe a year or two ago, we were in a property in Telluride. We rent in Telluride all the time, and we spent $3,000 a night, and that home was $7 million. And $3,000 for 1 month is $90,000. That'd be $90,000. Okay, so I can rent for $90,000. If most people spend 1 month at their property, now I understand you could be renting your property out and all that, and that helps offset some of this, but forget that for the moment. I just want to make a bigger point that I'm about to get to, so hang with me. For $90,000, I can rent a place for a month, which is the amount of time most people use their vacation homes that they have to get on planes and fly to. This is why I think lake houses, when your kids are not too old, or they could be old, but they're not playing a lot of sports, or they don't have a lot of school commitments, really actually work out because a lot of people can get to them in 1 or 2 hours. That's lake houses. Maybe that's more of a Texas thing. I really don't know. So if I could rent something for $90,000 a month, and not have to have the opportunity cost on $1.2 million I've invested and pulled out of investments, not have the carrying cost of $35,000 a month plus all the other stuff, that's a pretty good trade. And then I don't have to deal with it. It's not on my mind. It's just something I can show up, enjoy, and I am completely done with it. But now let's make it more interesting. And this is the point. For $6 million, so if I was buying a place in Telluride, I would not finance it. Nothing wrong with financing it. I just wouldn't. The math works either way, whether you finance or not. So if I were to buy, hypothetically, a $6 million business, I'm most likely buying $1 million a year in profits or more. But let's just go with $1 million a year in profits. So I'm paying 6 times profits for that business. If I don't improve that business at all, which would be stupid, then because I'm an entrepreneur, like the number one thing I should do is go make that $6 million business a $10 million business. But let's just say I don't. That $6 million business would be paid off in 6 years. There's some complications, but let's just go with that. Now I have $6 million in additional wealth. I now make $1 million a year. That $1 million a year makes me, just think about that. I can rent my home in Telluride 11 months of the year for $1 million a year. I probably wouldn't do that because, again, we're probably only going to use it a few months of the year max. So maybe I have 180 a year spend out of my $1 million in profit. Then imagine if I grow my $6 million profit, my $6 million in economic value business, 10% a year. Not only am I making $1 million a year, I'm now also growing my wealth by another $600,000 a year. And you can pretty much just run this math. I mean, it's pretty simple. If I could buy something and after 6 years have it paid for, make $1 million a year, be growing my value of that thing another 10% a year, I'm making 1.6, 1.8, 2 million. I'm making millions of dollars a year on this thing. I've massively upped my wealth. I wouldn't realistically be paying off my house if I financed it in only 6 years. I mean, hopefully I'm being clear, like, which is the better investment? If you're an entrepreneur and you know how to build something and run something, the math is so overwhelmingly in the column of buy a business, use those profits to finance your vacations or your home rentals, and just build the asset and let that thing grow forever and ever. And if you're in home services, you're not at risk of getting, in my opinion, disrupted by robotics or AI or something we don't see coming anytime real soon. If you're in technology, sure, you've got a lot more risk. But if you're in home services, I think your runway is quite good and your opportunity is quite strong. And it's an incredibly great place to park money. And you grow that thing and you take that money out, and then that's how you pay for your vacations. I have a friend that owned a $5, $6, $7 million home in Florida. and I know of several people have done this, and just was not using it and ultimately said, why would we do this? They sold it, they put all the money in the stock market, and if the market returns 500,000 that year, if it returns 7, if it returns 3, that's their travel budget. But that money is sort of locked in, and then they just use whatever that money produces each year. That's what they travel on. So again, if you're an entrepreneur, what's the math tell you? I think the math overwhelmingly tells you you shouldn't buy a second home. I think most second homes, because I've thought about this a lot for myself, and there's nothing wrong with doing it. If you want to do it, do it. That's the beauty of being an entrepreneur and being successful. You want to do it, you don't have to actually justify it with data or math. It doesn't have to work out. You just I want to do it. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying, if you look at it from a pure data standpoint, for me, have decided at this point in my life, it doesn't make sense. And I've noticed in myself, I think most of the reason why I would want something like this or want to do it, even though the data says no way, is because it's checking a box on a goal in life. It's not about it being a good investment. It's not the best place to put your money. Your money is better invested elsewhere. One last thing I'll say. If you are buying in the absolute best markets in the United States, you're not competing with other U.S. buyers. You are a little bit. You're competing with the richest of the richest U.S. buyers, and you're competing with tons of foreigners. Take the Aspen market, for example, and this is true of beach markets. This is true of real estate in Manhattan. This is true in a number of markets that are the best markets that have the most appreciation potential, that frankly price most people out and they can't even get into them. You're competing with foreigners who are parking their money in the United States into the best markets that will probably hold up. I heard one time, or in researching and thinking through this years back, that Aspen, something like 60 or 70% of all the homes in Aspen are paid for in cash. I think that's accurate from what I remember. My point here is that you are competing with buyers in some of the best markets in the United States who are not making their buying decisions based on what makes the most sense from a math standpoint, from your perspective or my perspective as being U.S. citizens. You're competing with people that wanting to get their money out of their country, and they're parking it in our country in very safe assets. Or they have a different motivation. And so those markets get priced up so high, it's really hard for us to ever justify buying in those markets. It just doesn't make any sense, because we're, again, competing with people who have completely different reasons for spending the kind of money they spend to buy those properties. So I've thought about this topic quite a bit over the last many, many years. My conclusion is, if you're an entrepreneur, you have a unique skill set, go buy another business, take the money out of that business, rent wherever you want to rent in the world, and you'll come out way ahead later in life, way ahead financially.